I guess we'll, whoa, hello. Guess we'll call in the Transportation Advisory Board meeting for December 12th. Call to order. Let's do a roll call.
Taylor Wicklund.
Here.
Patrick Hinterberger.
Present.
David McInerney.
Here.
Steve Lehner.
Here.
Diane Christ. Here. Councilmember Yarbrough.
Okay, we'll move on to approving the minutes of the preceding meeting from November. Need a motion to approve.
I'll move to approve the minutes from our November meeting.
Do I have a second?
I second the motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and I guess we've added an item. We'll go ahead and have a discussion and a nomination process for the vice chairperson role on the Transportation Advisory Board. Do I have any nominations?
I nominate Diane Christ to become our vice chair.
Any other nominations? Okay, I guess we'll just do a quick vote then. All those in favor of Diane Christ being vice chairperson of the Transportation Advisory Board, say aye.
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 Okay, and we'll move on to communications from staff.
Great, thank you, Chair Lehner. My name is Phil Greenwald, Transportation Planning Manager with the City of Longmont. Just wanted to quickly introduce, we talked a little bit about this last month, that we had hired a new transportation administrator, and that is Kyle Hayworth. And here he is. Kyle, maybe you could just give us a little brief background and introduction. Thanks. You'll learn that first.
Okay. Hey everyone, I'm Kyle Howarth. I'm the Transportation Engineering Manager. Nice to meet you all. I'm looking very forward to working with you guys to help improve safety of the city. I came from the city of North Glen, just kind of surrounded by Thornton, so I've dealt with a lot of more city traffic and commerce. But I am local. I did grow up in Loveland, so grew up there, came up here, and I'm slowly moving back more north, it feels like. So, like I said, it's great to work with you guys and look forward to make community a lot safer.
Very welcome.
Great, we're excited to have Kyle on board, obviously, so this is good news for the City of Longmont, so appreciate him coming tonight. We'll probably let him go if he needs to, but he might stick around for a little while here to see how things go. Just wanted to also talk a little bit about the mayor's transit meetup that happened on December 3rd. So Jim was reminding me that we entered through some doors that had been, I guess the First Amendment was used to put some signs up that said what they felt about cars, and some of them were a little bit more non-discreet than other messages, but it was pretty much cars kill was the message. And so we did see that as we walked in the door, but once we got inside, there was a pretty good crowd, and I know Board Member Wickland was there as well, and I think Board Member Chris, I saw you in the audience. I didn't get to talk to you too much, but apologize for that. But we did have a pretty good turnout. I think we had maybe 25, 30 people. But we had the Front Range Passenger Rail folks kind of introduce the statewide ideas of transit and mostly rail. It was the rail was the focus. And that transitioned into an RTD discussion, a regional transportation district discussion about buses and rail and their timelines and their goals and how they see their role in that, and working with Front Range Passenger Rail, quite frankly. And then I kind of threw in some things about our local transit and just things we're thinking about, maybe getting away from RTD a little bit and some of these things. Let RTD focus on the regional piece, and then we were really talking about how we could focus on the local piece and maybe go out to a third-party private sector vendor for some of that. So we're looking at some options that have been used around the country. And so that was kind of it. I think it went pretty well. Like I said, none of that maybe anger that was from the front of the building really translated into the actual meeting, so that was nice. It was a pretty polite crowd, and that's great. It shows well for Longmont, I think, with all the different folks that showed up. But any questions or any comments from the folks who were there? I'd love to hear your take on how you felt things went.
Phil, I thought you did a great job, and I was very impressed with how the turnout for that event. If I were going to point out any weakness, I think it's in the state program for transportation. I think we need a better plan for moving people throughout the state, on the decongesting the highways. But I think our local plan is solid, and also kind of the regional in terms of getting from Fort Collins to Boulder to Longmont was helpful, and I think we've identified that we need a bit better bus service in Longmont, a little better accessibility. So, and maybe Taylor has some other ideas.
Well, original thoughts of the meeting, because I was more excited about the rail discussion because I was 14 when Fast Tracks was passed, and it still is not a thing. So I'm hopeful. I just wonder what's going to be the overall timeline. And I did email Andy, and can't give a timeline anyways. So, but I think Phil, you did a great job. I think Longmont's very progressive and trying to think forward beyond the car, really. I'm just hoping the regional part will sustain itself somehow to also improve. Yeah.
Phil, could you give us a brief summary of some of the non-RTD transit ideas you presented?
Yeah, unfortunately, Chair Lehner and Board Member McInerney, I can't go into too many details, but I do know there's a couple groups out there. We actually have VIA mobility services in Boulder County that's been very active as far as paratransit. And I gave some bad information, evidently, to some of the folks and said that VIA was open to everyone. Anybody could take it. And that's true if you're in a rural area, but not in an urban area. So in the urban areas in Longmont, it really is for older adults and people with disabilities. So we point people toward the Flex Ride service, but VIA is kind of underlying all those different services. So VIA has their own service. They contract out with RTD for other micro mobility services, or micro transit services, I should say, smaller transit. And they would be one of the people that may apply. If we put out a request for proposal, which we have to do by city code, we'd have to put out a request for proposal and be pretty specific about how much we can spend on this and what we're looking for from a provider. So it'd have to be very specific. And they said that they'd be interested. And then there's a VIA transportation services that's more national. It's actually international, but it's done a lot of things in Arlington, Texas is one of the places where they operate. There's a couple places in North Carolina, and they're smaller. Most of them are more smaller cities, kind of like Longmont, and they have provided some information to us about what they can provide and those timelines. We really talked about waiting no more than 15 minutes to take a trip that lasts no more than 15 minutes across town. And so that's our goal, and it's really built for people who don't have access to a private vehicle. So those are kind of the three goals that we want to put into a request for proposals or a scope of work. And that would go out nationally. We'd let everybody know about it. We would get many more than just those two that I've mentioned. So But that has to go through this board. We have to come back here. We'd have to talk to you about it. You'd have to make a recommendation to council. So we'd have to go to council on that, and we'd have to really start to get our ducks in a row for all the different things that means, because that's a fairly significant chunk of dollars. So we'd need to go for some grants probably to get the, the seed money to at least buy the equipment. And then we'd have to talk about the sustainability of that, because we don't want this to be like the bike share program where we kind of went in and there was a sponsorship piece of that, and eventually they went away and it kind of flopped, quite frankly. So we don't want that to happen here. And that's part of this. We just need a very sustainable approach and something that we can count on for years and not just year or a couple months. We need something that'll be there in the long term.
There we go. One last question. Was there any discussion about, and this is aligning kind of with the comment you're talking about with the program with VIA, about the last mile? It seems to be that's the biggest challenge that we have with any sort of end-to-end, whether it's rapid transit to a transportation plan. When we're talking about commuting, are we really addressing that last mile piece? And was there any discussion of that, I guess I would ask?
Chair Lehner, there were a couple questions about that, and we really did try to talk about trying to mix in all the things that we, a better, more robust bicycle system, a better, more robust, and I think I said safe, reliable, and comfortable bicycle, pedestrian system, and transit system. So all these different things, and we talk about regional transit, but then how does that translate into that more local gridded, nearby transit, and that idea of not waiting more than 30 minutes total for once you request a ride to get somewhere. So we talked about a mix and a blend of all those different things to cover that final mile or first mile.
Thank you.
Chair, we had no more items from staff, so that was it. We have lots of things going on. That's not true. We had one other thing. I wanted to see if Jim would talk about the Boston Avenue Bridge.
So real quick informational item. We've been working on the Boston Avenue Bridge, which is one of the phases of the RSVP improvement project. That project, we finally got that design done, permitted. It is now out to bid. The bids are due in I believe, the third week in January. So we anticipate seeing construction underway more than likely in March, April timeframe. It's right near Left Hand Brewery. Which will help. The trail's been closed in that area for quite some time. This will be the next phase. The next phase beyond that is the Army Corps of Engineers project. They are at about 95% design. Anticipate that they will start construction in spring, summer of this year. But they have like a year time frame on their project. The Boston Avenue Bridge is an 18-month project. We do anticipate it will be built in stages, anticipating that we will maintain the flow of traffic on Boston.
Very good. Do we have any public invited here to be heard? Just staff. Okay. I guess then we can move on to the information items, starting with the crash report, which I know that's been long awaited.
Sure, I'm sorry. I will introduce Caroline Michael, who worked on that report almost exclusively, so this is really her baby. And so I'll turn it over to Caroline to talk more about kind of the overall trends that we've noticed in the crash data for this latest year.
Hello, board. Does everyone have a copy of it with them? Because there's some hard copies over there. Anyone doesn't have one? Okay, so I don't know how many of you like dug into this like way beforehand and already have questions like raring to go. But I was just gonna maybe like do a brief overview of like overall trends. So from section 1, figure 1, which just has a list of every crash record we've recorded in the city back to 2000. We also have it back to actually like 1990, but I split it off at 2000 for some readability. You can see there's 1,661 records in our system, and that is the city system, not necessarily counting any additional CDOT records, which we'll get to. But so it's still higher than 2020, which is to be expected. 2020 was a very low year in terms of crashes for pretty like explanatory, like self-explanatory reasons. Traffic went down quite a bit during COVID-19. We're still kind of below kind of the highs we were seeing from like 2015 to 2019. I think PD was still an accident alert for at least part of 21 at the beginning. So which basically means that some of the more minor ones don't always get reported. All the serious ones should still be included though. But in general, we're kind of moving past any COVID-19, and anything I think we're seeing now might be more permanent in terms of just some shifts in like work from home becoming more popular and more people like utilizing that option, and maybe not seeing the same peaks at some intersections, especially during like the rush hour traffic times. But yeah, we've also had, but you can see from the blue line, the injury or worse is kind of still in line with what we were seeing pre-COVID. And we had 7 fatalities in 2021, and that's counting crash numbers, not necessarily individuals, because one fatal crash can sometimes result in more than one fatality. Figure 1.1, I think, has a better view of Longmont's population and how crashes have kind of changed in regard to population. So even as our population has gone up, we are still having like pretty high numbers or a pretty high crash rate back in like 2000, 2001, despite having a lower population in the city. But yeah, so the 16.6 crashes per 1,000 population is still an increase from 2020 again. But again, we are not quite back at that pre-2020 level at this time. I'm not sure how many we have for total for 2022 at this time, but we'll see like kind of maybe next year how that ends up playing out. For section 2 is a lot of kind of data about timing and when our crashes happen. A lot of this is pretty similar to what it's been in the past, so I don't think anything here was very surprising to me. You know, we get most of our 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. most of when these happen. Usually not too many during the early morning, late night hours. And you can kind of see from that figure 2.1, these trends have been pretty consistent for the past 5 years. And then moving on, most crashes on Friday, again, that's kind of how it's been for a while. I don't have a very reasoned explanation for why that is, but pretty consistent, less on Sundays, kind of to be expected. One thing is that it used to be that December was the highest like month for crash reports, but it's actually kind of shifted to October. And again, I actually don't have much of an explanation as to why. Maybe we do have. There's more that happen in like the last 6 months of the year than like the first 6 months of the year. Again, I don't 100% know why that happens, because it's even higher in August, September than it is in February or March. So again, but it's pretty consistent with what's happened before, so not too surprising in the data findings. Section 3 goes over some of the common causes of like impairment, which is the DUI, which is increasingly changing to include the new crash report that the state has actually calls out marijuana usage specifically, which before they didn't, and they actually made the change to that form in May 2021. So it'll be maybe interesting to see how much of that actually gets recorded. But they've definitely been on, the DUIs have been like pretty flat, like overall over the 2021. But they're still like a lot higher than probably what we'd like to see. Like we saw some very high numbers in like 2018, 19.
Yeah, just a quick question, if I could. With the medical complications in this section with impairment, how do they verify whether it's a medical complication versus, let's face it, somebody could be looking at their phone and say, oh, I had something happen where I passed out or whatever. And so is that a concern that could change or not give us an accurate picture when it comes to these numbers?
That's a good question, and it's one I can't answer very well because they do have separate, so the crash reports that they get, they're separate contributing factors. And so like medical complication is one of them, but there's also ones that just cover distracted driving from cell phone usage, other vehicle occupants, radio, and it goes on. But as far as how many people might not be honest about that, I don't know. It's possible. But those have also been kind of on an upward trend, which on one hand, there is some like maybe demographic change, like older populations, people driving as they get into like more, as they're like getting into their 70s and 80s, could contribute partially to that. And unfortunately, they usually don't say on the report what it really is. Like what, it just says medical complication and that's kind of it. So, and kind of as a side note to this, that's not really on here, but AAA actually has a research division where they do like nationwide surveys, and they just actually put out their most recent, it's like the driving safety culture index, where they have like a random sample of like 2,600 drivers nationwide, it's not state specific, where they poll people about how dangerous do you perceive this behavior to be behind the wheel versus, okay, but how many times did you actually do it in the past 30 days? And the results are very interesting if you want to look it up. And there were quite a few, as I remember, like driving while like excessively drowsy, like quite a few people like admit to doing that. So, it's AAA. If you Google like AAA research, you can find it online pretty easily. And I haven't they just put it out it was like December 22, so I haven't read through the whole thing. But yeah, a lot of people do admit to using their phones, especially the, hands-free, which isn't perceived to be as dangerous as holding the phone to your ear, but is still, I think, pretty distracting when you're driving. So it's interesting to see how the public perception of that is. So again, other contributing factors still make up the bulk of crashes we see. So.
And one last question, sorry.
No, go ahead. Ask questions, please.
When I looked at the fatality reports on each one of those, I was struck by how many distracted driving was the cause or contributing factor, but we don't have any charts on distracted driving here. We just have impairment, medical, drowsy, those sorts of things, but nothing about distracted driving. So I'm just curious if, are those numbers that are going to start getting tracked, or?
We can. Like, that's something, if like you're interested in seeing it, I can like put it in to a table. Part of it is,
Is there a trend line to it? That's the thing.
Yeah.
I mean, are we seeing a trend of higher distracted driving? And I'm speaking from personal experience as a driver, as an auto driver. I see a lot of it now. And I just don't know if that is a trend or if it's just, coincidence. I'm just saying this.
yeah. And it's also one of those things, especially with cell phones, that I suspect is probably underreported. Because there's not, because police usually don't get there until after the crash has already happened. And if it's not serious, they might not do, I can't really speak for them, but it might not be the most. Oh, wait, we do. But, yeah, might be underreported. Wait, do we have?
Figure
Oh,
6.3 has a graph for
was like, it's
distracted
not-
driving crashes. I knew I'd seen it.
But that, yeah, that has some, it's not like delineated by the specific like subcategories of it, but it gives some insight on that issue. Just going through it, I guess I don't need to explain like every graph on here. But a lot of the demographics you can see pretty young men are often the drivers suspected of driving under the influence. It's more equal for some of the medical asleep fatigue crashes, but it's still like young men, a lot of them. So I'm sure various societal causes of that, but probably won't speculate too heavily. So vulnerable road users. We've done this in the past slightly differently. In the past, we also included, I'm always kind of on the fence whether or not to include motorcycles. I didn't this time. I think they're sufficiently different from like a bicycle or a pedestrian that they're more of a motor vehicle. But again, it's always something we could continue to point out on the report specifically.
Vice Chair, Chris, question.
Carolyn, I'm just in, I think you've been referring to this, there's just some relational data, which I don't know how you would collect it, but it would be helpful to, if we were gonna affect any of these numbers, know some kind of cause and effect or some kind of patterns that we're seeing. But I did notice, and I guess I'm looking at figure 1.1, that for the most part, the trend in crash rates follows the population growth, except for the years 2008 through 2014, where it's below the growth line. And the only thing I can add to that is, I know that's during the Great Recession. And I
Yeah.
wonder if that had some impact on crash rates. I'm not sure what your input would be on why that would affect the crash rate. But
I mean, that's probably the biggest factor I would think of, would be recession. So, like, under unemployment probably resulted in less commuting. Now, that's not to say, COVID was kind of interesting. I mean, we definitely saw less then too. So I think there's some correlation.
But the bounce back rate in 2021 seemed like it was high, because some people were still working from home, I think. I think it was, I forget what the numbers are, maybe 60% went back to commuting. But, so I wonder if that's a out of practice type situation?
Vice Chair Chris, if I may, there was also issues, almost, I mean, this was a national trend, was as people started returning to work, and there had been this huge lull in traffic and crashes, as people returned to work, the roads were wide open, and so people were able to go faster. And so nationally, the trend was that we saw more severe crashes from opening businesses in late 21 into 20, or late 20 into 21. So that might be part of the issue. Again, we're speculating. But this definitely shows that people were not crashing as much and not driving as much during the recession years, just because of the fact, yeah, no job, I don't have a job. Typically, the gas prices go up, so it's more expensive to drive, and all those different factors. So people cut down their driving for a number of different reasons. So that's why we see some of these trend lines the way we do, and why you see such a sharp increase, though it's one of the lower numbers on this table, so still, except for 2020, but that might be some of the factors.
I wanted to point it out because it was one of the few where I had some relational data I could kind of add into it or surmise, I guess. So, thank you.
Okay. Well, some things I included, one table I included that's new on this was table 4.1, where I was trying to determine, because this is a question that comes up pretty frequently, and even this isn't as detailed as it could be, although I tried to like condense it into something of like a readable form for this report. But, you know, where are pedestrian and cyclist crashes happening? Like, where are people most vulnerable on our roadways? Which parts of our roadways need improvement? So Main Street came out pretty high on this list. That is, on one hand, counting like all of Maine. I mean, that's like Plateau to Park Ridge Avenue. But if you want to break it down in some like more granularity, that is possible. I wrote down some of it. I think Maine in Mountain View was the highest single intersection with like 9 in the 5-year period. Also downtown, as I was defining from 2nd to 9th, although I think it might actually be to 1st. I'm not sure. I was doing 2nd to 9th though, but and that was accounted for 25. So if you think of like that segment, and that was the intersections and the mid-blocks. Not necessarily the mid-block crosswalks in downtown Maine. Some of them were, I know at least 2 were actually in the 200 block. But, and that did include 9th and Maine, which has like 6 on its own. But, yeah, and it's also, most of these are the higher volume arterials. Mountain View Avenue is a collector. It is a bit of a higher volume collector than some others. It is like a straight, you can go airport to Deerwood or all the way through. So it does get, I think, maybe some volume or more volume than some other collectors. But yeah, I don't, unless there's any comments from the board, I'll just move on. Okay, comparison with other cities. This one. So the data from this was referenced from CDOT has like publicly available like fact sheets that are fatal crash statistics by city. So pulling from those, kind of using like a 5-year average, our rate per population is higher than some of our neighbor cities, including higher than Fort Collins, Boulder, in Loveland. We are still behind. We still have rates lower than places like Commerce City, Pueblo, Lakewood, and Grand Junction. I tried to pick communities with at least some kind of a comparable population, but it's get a pretty wide spread in Colorado. Yeah, and from this table, you can, at least I've been trying to like kind of work backwards. Okay, well, do certain communities have like much lower rates than we do? And why is that? It's like Centennial is the lowest one on this list. I'm still, you know, looking at it from the high level, I'm not 100% sure why.
Lower speeds?
Lower speeds, but they do have some like wide, like 4 or 5 lane arterial intersections that are not too different from ours, it would seem. So I wonder why. I don't know. I've only done like a very like surface kind of reasoning of this. So I guess stay tuned, but on what strategies that maybe other communities do that we can potentially implement.
I would think, looking at the list, Loveland, Arvada, maybe Broomfield would have more similar characteristics than a Centennial, because I would think Centennial being, I won't call it urban, of course, but suburban and so locked that it's going to have, on average, I would think lower speeds in general, just because of the amount of traffic that they have, I would think.
That's one thing we've speculated on, is that there's a congestion level here, especially in the city of Boulder. Whenever we compare to them, they seem so much lower that there's very much, when they're high demand on their roadways, it's very congested, and so the cars move very slowly, so the severity of the crashes or the number of crashes is lower too. So in some ways, congestion is good, we think, but we need to look into that more and make sure we have that dialed in a little better for you all.
On that issue, the comparison between Longmont and Boulder, is the default speed limit in Boulder lower than it is in Longmont?
They did change it to 20 on local streets relatively recently.
Boulder has changed it. They have a Vision Zero policy, and so their action plan is enacted and going. And so they did do some speed limit changes on a large number of streets, but the enforcement issue is still the critical factor there. So there's a couple streets that I have to use all the time when I travel to Boulder, and the speeds haven't changed. The speed limit has changed, but the speeds have not changed. So we need to look into that as we move to a Vision Zero policy, is how productive is that? How cost effective is changing a sign versus really getting the speeds down? We really do think it's more of that congestion piece that's helping.
Board Member Hamburger?
Oh, yes. One question, do you know how this compares with the national average?
Not the national, but I do. There's 2 other tables on here with
Yeah.
like other states and nationwide communities that again were chosen, well, one based on proximity and then also just like population. Although really probably what I should have done is population density in some of these. Is probably the more accurate measure, because some of these you get like pretty rural. We have like a lot of rural highway sections on some, especially in the nationwide categories. So it might not be a very like great 1-1 from that to Longmont, even if it's
Sure.
like the same population. But I mean, you can see, like nationwide, there's definitely some areas of the country that probably have like much higher incidence of fatal crashes, and then there's some that have much lower. So it would be interesting to look into more. I do know that fatals are generally on an upward trend though, like nationwide.
Okay. The other question I had was, is there any mechanism you guys would reach out to Centennial or Boulder or Arvada and just ask them what they're doing, if they have any novel ideas?
Yeah, I mean, or yeah, with Dr. Cog. There is a Dr. Cog like Vision Zero group that where people will sometimes like share and collaborate ideas, but
yeah, I bet.
yeah, but I mean, it's like definitely something like, how are you keeping your rates like relatively low compared? And it's, again, like I have some theories, but it's nothing I've that's proven by any means, so.
Okay.
Like for one thing is I know some of these, like Centennial's a pretty new community. It was like incorporated, I want to say early 2000s. And it's like we've been around since the 1800s. So we probably have some more like grid infrastructure, especially in like the downtown area. And a lot more just like four-way intersections that create more opportunities for like conflict, but then at the same time, that's not necessarily where we see the fatal crashes happen either, so.
If I could just say, I mean, based on relation of population to fatalities, Centennial, Arvada, Loveland must be doing something better in regards to that when our number, population-wise is close, but our number is so much higher. And if I look at the trend all the way across from 2017 to 2021, 2019 is an outlier, but even still, compared to those communities, I think Board Member Hinterberger has a great idea of, can we interface with traffic staff there and find out, are they doing something?
Yeah.
Is it, is it education, is it, whatever it might be.
Well, also as we move into the Vision Zero realm, that'll just be part of that discussion. That'll be something we have to do in order to kind of figure out, how to make these changes to get to our vision of zero.
Okay. Well, I'll move on to section 6. Snow and ice, it's something we've been tracking for a while. It was significantly lower in 21, which isn't, as I remember, it was a pretty mild winter. We didn't even really get snow until like very late in the year. So that doesn't surprise me too much. But again, that's something that, well, we can't control the weather, but we can control like roadway treatments after and plowing and what our response time is to that. So that is a way we can help maybe bring those numbers down if they need to in the future. Again, these total crashes involving the younger and older demographics, something we've been tracking for a while. It's been a pretty dramatic change if you look at it from the past. It used to be a very high, the 18 or younger, like teenage demographic used to be involved in a lot more crashes than they are now, and it's evened out, or now it's actually below sort of that 65 plus demo. So it's just like that demographic change that's been happening.
And we think that's probably related to the different ideas of how you get your license these days. I think anybody who has anybody in that 16-year-old or been through that recently, the 16-year-old driver's license, it's much more difficult to get now, and you can't drive with, your friends from 16 to 17 now, and there's a bunch of rules until you turn 18, which weren't in place in the early 2000s. So we think that that's part of this trend.
Yeah, and then figure 6.2 is similar, except it's supposed to be the at-fault driver, which traditionally was always like vehicle 1 in an accident, although there's some gray area to that sometimes, but you can see they've leveled out like quite a bit in terms of demographics. So when it used to be a much higher of like the young, like 18 and younger crowd. And then figure 6.3 is distracted driving. So it is that blue line at the bottom, so 207, which is lower than those like 350, 346, 337 numbers. Again, I suspect there's challenges with reporting some of those things. So it's not the easiest thing to maybe get a handle on, but especially for the sort of more minor rear ends that might happen.
Carolyn, I have a question. I noticed on the bottom, there on 6.3, in 2006, there was a dip in distracted driving. And I noticed that same dip in figure 3.0, DUI and medical asleep fatigue crashes. I wonder, was there more censoring of that by the police departments, do you think? I'm thinking maybe that's something that could be verified.
Yeah, in
Because
2006.
it shows up in both
Yeah,
graphs.
I probably couldn't tell you back then because I did not live in Colorado. And certainly didn't work for the city at that time. So I'm not 100% sure, but not sure if Phil has any insight. How long have you worked for the city? I don't remember.
Yeah, longer than that, unfortunately. Well, fortunately, but unfortunately, I'm getting old. But, yeah, I can't think of what happened in 2006 that was necessarily lead to that kind of dip. I'm trying to think of, again, recessionary kind of things, and I think that was mostly 2007, 2008, so.
Yeah,
Not sure what's going on there. It's very interesting, though, that you found that and pointed that out, so. Looks like the DUI one maybe dipped in 2004. Oh, and then the DUI dipped in 2006, you're right, and the medical dipped in 2004, so very interesting it's so hard to like figure this out. This is why this is gonna be so difficult to meet a Vision Zero goal, because, and as you'll see in the fatal crashes, unfortunately, we listed them, but we just wanted to show that there's a lot of factors that go into all these different crashes, and this is kind of what the data proves out, is there's so many things that go on, and we're trying to really address as many as we possibly can, but there's only so much you can do with the resources available. So we're gonna have to put more effort into communication, education, enforcement, engineering, so all those different things that you hear about all the time are gonna have to get more resources to make this really follow the trends that we wanna see.
So, Phil, because you mentioned engineering, that's what I kind of care about, is the design. So like when crashes happen, I don't know if you had a chance to read the sustainable safety packet I gave you, but one of the Dutch principles now is sending engineers out to every crash to try to innovate and come up with a creative solution instead of building the road as we always do, but come up with different ideas. I don't know if that's something we have the capacity to do that even, but an idea. No.
Well, the things you're talking about is exactly why I'm here to, it's kind of my wheelhouse of signals, intersections, and roadway signs and striping. So one thing, we have a lot of plans coming with Vision Zero, new transportation comprehensive plan, and there are new technologies I'm looking at that we're very excited to bring to you all eventually, hopefully early this year. But looking at other countries, other states, and how they handle traffic is something I frequently do and try to find creative solutions. One of the biggest issues that comes to roadway users is having a predictable roadway, because there's a lot of stuff we could put on the road. But when you're a 70-year-old grandmother who just goes to the store to get groceries, maybe once or twice a week, she comes up with this intersection and can't decipher it. Good example is the continuous flow intersections you start seeing popping up around. Engineering, by the numbers, they look great, but sometimes you have to back it up with, this is how we're improving safety. In kind of more of a residential setting, they're not as great, because you get a lot more confused drivers who are going the wrong way, roundabouts that aren't properly designed is a good example of that. I'm sure everyone's seen someone take a left through a roundabout versus going right, even though there's 20 signs that say go this way. So that's something we all consider when putting things out in the roadway is, can anyone go up to this intersection and be able to navigate it without too much pause? And then one of the big things I'm a big proponent of is data-backed engineering. So any of these projects that we're gonna be implementing, providing additional resources for, I'm very big on having before and after studies, showing that we can decrease crashes or severity of crashes. and then make sure we're getting good reporting. So also a big proponent of working with our police department where it's a collaborative effort, not just pointing fingers at it's PD's problem, talking about underreporting. I do believe most officers report truthfully on the reports because if they do not truthfully put stuff that's on the report, if they hand out a ticket, that gets thrown out in court, and prosecutors don't like that. So a good way is to say, we're missing this information. Can your officers provide additional, are they distracted driving? How were they distracted driving? And then continuously seeing what police officers see in the field of, well, they said they weren't, but they were. So I'm a very big proponent of collaboration with all departments in the city, and then backing that up with continuous data. So to answer your question, yes, we're looking at lots of different technology options and looking for budget friendly, so we can do more areas at once, but also looking at our highest need areas as well,
Yeah.
which I think is our next section as well. So
And to mention roundabouts, I'm a big fan of them. I'm not a huge fan of how we build them here, just because because in the crash report there is one roundabout that's on a common
yep.
bountiful or whatever, and just just looking at that, it's just like, well, I think a car can actually just kind of zoom through instead of forcing a slowdown.
Yep, and that's part of the engineering it correctly and providing the right solution in the right area. And a lot with the roundabouts or any traffic calming measures, it's all about deflection. In a lot of those areas, you see a lot of neck downs where they just bring in the road and have a bulb out. The problem is, the guy going straight, just go straight, no reason to stop. I've tried out diverging diamonds where you kind of go out and back in. I've seen those work really great. Residential perception hasn't been totally great on those because they're a little intrusive to the neighborhood. But as far as speed reduction, it's significant speed reduction in areas. Stuff like that, I think the easiest ones we can do right now are road diets. I've seen about 20% reduction in speeds on level roadways in residential areas. So it's a great way to slow people down, and it's cost effective. So that's the kind of solutions we're kind of looking for is what benefit we're getting and make sure we're being equitable across residential, Main Street, all the different sections of the city. So.
Yeah. And I guess one more point is because the overall crash is 60% were at intersections, 40% at signalized. And again, talking about roundabouts, traditional four-way intersections, at least for my research, is 32 conflict points, where a roundabout is 8. So I would just like to see, us become Carmel, Indiana, but we'll find out, yeah.
Yep, and, those are always good options. Unfortunately, those do take considerable amount of time and funds to construct. But one thing we are looking at is how to make the intersection experience a little more predictable and also reducing stop and delays in the area. So it's something we're really looking to this next cycle of our
That's the
plan.
other advantage is roundabouts reduce emissions by 30% as well.
Yep, because you're not stopping and going. Yep, exactly.
Yep.
So looking ways to improve, and so always trying to think if there's another solution besides the cookie cutter solution.
All right.
So.
Cool.
Kyle, I think I heard you say that you've seen a 20% reduction in crashes related to road diets?
Speeds.
20% reduction in speed. And do you attribute that to just the psychological effect of having a narrower travel lane?
Yes. So generally, especially residential is usually the best example of this because you have a predictable type of car that goes through there. A lot of it is how comfortable is it for a person to just drive down the roadway. I know probably everyone's been guilty of it. Long day at work, you're coming home, just zoned out, and you realize you're going 45 coming up Main Street when it goes down to 35, and you don't realize it. And that's a lot of what the road diet, radar signs do help with, is keeping the honest people honest. And that helps target, as far as enforcement goes, of who are the people that aren't going to be affected by those measures. I know off the top of my head, I had 3 different streets this last year that we put road diets on in my last city. We dropped the 85th percentile in speed from 32 miles per hour down to 26. And that is just by road diet. We reduced the lanes down to 10 feet and provided an 8-foot parking lane on each side for homes. So something, again, when we look at what we're putting out in the roadways, I like to back up by data, because then we can say that it is working. Do we need to do more? Are we doing too much? And how are we affecting traffic in the surrounding area as well? So not increasing cut-through traffic to different areas.
Thanks, Kyle. I want to go back to distracted driving for a moment. Does Longmont PD ever check mobile phone records to try to determine whether a driver was using a mobile phone at the time of a crash? You know, I watch a lot of crime shows on TV, and they're always contacting the mobile phone providers to get information.
So I guess I couldn't totally answer for them. I know like for something like a fatal, they do a pretty in-depth like investigation. As you go down that scale, I'm not just sure how much they investigate that. Once you get down to like the property damage only, I'm not sure. I don't think they're trying to like lie to us or anything, but yeah, that's kind of my answer. And maybe that's something I can reach out to PD and see if. Also, there's situations where they don't have a lot of information to go on, especially for like a single vehicle that like runs off the road, hits a utility pole or something like that. Like that person might leave the scene and they might just be going kind of on like a witness account. So those situations pop up as well.
Quick question. Do we track in this hit and run? Do we track hit and run?
Yes, we can. We do have that information. Yes, it's
Okay.
not on here.
Okay.
Like as in like a gross number of like hit and runs, but
Yeah. I would just be curious,
Yeah.
because that seems to me would be where you're not going to get, obviously, the information as to, because the hit and run driver does something and they leave. We don't know what the cause of the action was, but I'd be curious to find out what the overall gross numbers are in terms of hit and run as it relates to the safety in the city.
yeah. And then I think if you go back, I mean, there's like bicyclists that leave the scene as well sometimes. So it's like sometimes you're not even getting like a full account from them in the police report. But okay, so this is like section 7's the high crash locations. So this is a lot of different tables. It's kind of the same format that's been on previous reports. The table A and B are added. This was a bit of a late addition, but there's like a bolded line on each of those. So everything above that is something that was previously a high crash intersection or location, but has dropped off. And then below that are new locations that have come onto the lists. So I guess some notable ones to kind of point out here, and they're not in any particular order. I was probably going from like class 1A, 1B, 1C. So like the numbers in any of the columns aren't necessarily in any kind of order. But so 3rd and Main went off the list because we saw that go down from 65 total crashes to 54. And you can kind of look, some of these, it might be kind of, like for something like Airport and Clover Basin, actually, and we changed that to protected left turn only operation. So that could be a reason why those numbers have dropped. So some of them I have like a pretty clear explanation. Some of them I probably have to research it more to see why or what categories of crashes went down. And then some of it was also the ADT numbers influence how these are ranked. So there's, like the average daily traffic, sorry. Explain my acronyms. Which I kind of question how much that even has like bearing on these, because it's kind of an old predictive methodology we've been using for a while. But then there's also the argument to be made that you just go by crashes and that's it. Either way, that's where you see some of like the, like 3rd and Martin at the bottom there, it actually went down, but it went up. So that's like some ADT like methodology getting moved to like a different class. So I figured I'd be honest about it. That sometimes the methodology does work out sort of strangely, or not how you'd expect. But I think a lot of these you can see like at least in the top rows on table A and B, you can see like a reduction happening. So, and it also is weighted. Oh, sorry, but it is weighted as well. So if it previously had a lot of like serious injuries and those have like kind of dropped off, then that can also change its ranking, even if it's just one, but that's weighted heavily, then it can move it down.
Is there any idea why Third Avenue is populated below the bold line, which are the higher crash index numbers? Do you have any maybe thoughts on why that kind of shows up?
So you're like 3rd and Lashley and 3rd and Martin?
As well as 3rd and Bowen?
Yeah, so 3rd and Lashley and 3rd and Martin, I think was a case. So I ended up adjusting some of the ADTs down. Well, because on some of them, I think I was actually overestimating it. So I was trying to be a little bit more accurate. So that's part of it. Like it goes to, so it might have been in the higher class with like highway, with Ken Pratt and Maine. So it looked pretty low compared to those. But then in like the more class 1B, it ranked higher.
Right, but there's 3 Third Avenue instances in these 10, so that's 30%. So is there a trend with Third Avenue that you hadn't noticed prior or we're noticing now that's causing there to be a higher rate of conflict?
Yeah, I mean, like 3rd and Lashley and 3rd and Martin are both very like similar, close together. That same section. 3rd and Bowen's more, it is on the collector section. So I would think of those a little differently, but like, yeah, 3rd and Lashley, 3rd and Martin. Yeah, I mean, it's like we actually had there was actually a crash at 3rd and Lashley recently. Fatal, but I think it was pretty.
Well, and also I think you've seen out there that we've done some projects on the east portion of that 3rd Avenue. So you'll see that we did some median treatments as well as some more of that complete streets road diet that Kyle was mentioning earlier. So we currently now have, well, we just put out this year those bicycle lanes, buffered bicycle lanes. We've narrowed the lanes of traffic as well. We've lowered the speed limit. So there's been a bunch of different things that have happened in the last, I would say, 2 or 3 years that will hopefully change these trends, right? So when you see them pop onto the list in 2021, we're hoping that what we've done in the last year and the last 2 years will bring those back down below. But the 3rd and Bowen is an anomaly of some sort, and we need to figure out kind of what's going on there as far as what type of crashes and why they're going up.
For the 3rd and Bowen, my understanding 3rd's gonna be repaved and re-looked at in a different way, so that'll probably help. But then, do we get to see a little bit of that design before anything?
That's the idea.
All
That's
right,
the idea.
Cool.
Bring it out to the public and make sure there's buy-in for those different designs.
All right, cool.
And then table B is like with the segments instead of the intersections as well.
Oops, real quick, Jim's saying that February, he's planning to come out to the public meeting for that.
Yeah, and actually in the segments, that Collier Street, 17th to 23rd, like that's pretty high, like 21 for a collector segment. So that's something that like kind of stood out to me as something to look at, because I mean that's like a parking lane, bike lane, 2 through lanes each direction kind of segment, so. Also Main and 23rd, it was kind of like already approaching that like 1.0 threshold before, but it's like now jumped into like the high crash segments. But the rest of these are a lot of tables with a lot of information going on. I will say like Highway 119 and Main Street, it's been the high crash intersection for years. Very high volume, at least as part of it. I did break down at least the top 3, because I know I've been asked this before, in my notes here, into like what types are these. And it's like 119 in Maine, like 159 of those are rear ends. But 24 are like front to side, so like right angle broadsides. 21 are actually same direction side swipes. And then 19 are approach turn or like the left turn type crashes. And for Highway 66 in Maine, we have 63 rear ends, 32 approach turn, left turn type crashes, which we did change that to protected only left turn operation. Now it's like it all blurs. I don't remember exactly which year that was, but that will hopefully bring that down over time. 16 front to side. 10 that just say curb, which usually means like sort of either running over one of the channelizing islands or running off the side of the road somehow. And then again, the 9 were the same direction side swipes. And 17th in Maine, 75 of those were rear ends. 27 were the approach turn, left turn types. And then 24 were the front to side, with 18 the same direction side swipes. So with those, it's important context, because rear ends tend to happen at signals. In fact, when you signalize an intersection, your number of rear ends might actually increase because you're introducing a stop that perhaps wasn't there before. But when we have the left turn and front to side, like the broadsides, there's potentially some changes in left turn phasing and signal operation that can be made to try to alleviate that. So, and I can like send these numbers to you. I know I just like rattled off a lot of like numbers, but if anyone's interested, I have files available. So, yeah, just looking through, a lot of these intersections are pretty similar to what they have been before. Alpine Street and Mountain View Avenue is still on the Class 1B section. But a lot of those crashes actually happened before it was signalized, because that didn't get signalized till 2020. Unless anyone has any like specific questions about any of these, I was not going to go through all those. We'd be here. I've already taken up a lot of time. And then Section 8 was new to what we've done in previous years. This was like all the fatal crashes with a location and at least like some level of detail of description of what happened. It's a question that we get a lot, like, especially in the context of considering Vision Zero. I think it's good information to have. Like I said, I haven't done this in quite this way before. So, and I realize sometimes it's helpful to have like a visual, but that would have made this quite long. But hopefully I was effective in explaining what was happening without using too many personally identifying details. And I think some of the takeaway of this for me, at least for me, was, yeah, there's a lot going on in some of these fatal crashes that happen with varying degrees of like engineering influence you can have over that. And some of them just don't have, like, even like the actual reports don't have a ton of detail to get a lot of insight into what might have been happening. And I mean, like, the locations are pretty, yeah, it's like talking about this before, there's not necessarily one location where it's, Highway 66 in Maine, there's been, 3+ fatals that all have to do with the eastbound left turn or something very like concrete, then you can go out and make that, change the timing on the eastbound left turn. A lot of them are at various different places, and it's not always so consistent, but it's something I've read a lot into, so I don't know if anyone had any questions about any of these, but.
I think also we, as staff, would like to hear your suggestions on what you'd like to see in the report. We've tried to provide as much as we can in this, but if there's any suggestions on how we can improve this report in the future, that would be wonderful too. But otherwise, that's all we have from staff on the crash data report.
Thank you for the report. I'd like to know more about how you guys are using it. Is it reprioritizing our dollars or our efforts, or is it showing new problem areas that we didn't know we had? It's a great job putting together this report. How are we using it, is my question.
Well, I think when we do our tip report, when we come to you with the dollars we're going after for federal grant dollars, you'll see that a lot of these intersections are on, that have something to do with it, maybe ancillarily. But like 66 in Maine, that's part of a broader project that we're doing on State Highway 66 for safety. County Line Road, we're doing a project there, and you saw some crashes on County Line Road. So when we get this data, we do use it as far as which projects are we gonna go after in the future? And where should we go after those dollars? Do we come up with them internally? Do we go out and use this data to justify some of the dollars that we need to get from grants?
Yeah, I think the other part was that maybe, it could just be used to affirm where we already knew we were and where we're going with things. So if that's the case, that's great. That means we have some good direction and everything going on. But thank you.
Get my chair back. So just to follow up with additional information, we basically, it's data. So we use it to help us generate where we can do improvements. In some cases, it will be larger scale capital improvements. And the example I will use on that is what you don't see in this report is the Pike Road Main Street intersection, which we had identified for a number of years as one of the top 10 intersections. So as Pike Road came to be a project that we were going to put on multimodal improvements on, we also looked at Main Street and what we could do with the traffic signal in conjunction with the CDOT improvements. Unfortunately, some of these projects for the capital take years to develop. One of the other items we utilize is every year we budget in our operating budget a certain amount of dollars for safety improvements. So we'll look at some of these intersections. We may do small scale signal improvements, such as changing some of the timings or adding protected movements, so that if we identify that there's a number of left turn crashes, we'll go out, and we did it recently a few years ago on Airport Road, where we saw some incidents of kids getting either sideswiped or actually hit early in the mornings. Because of the way the signal was configured for the flashing yellow, we took that out and added in a protected left, so that vehicles who are making that left going southbound actually had to stop, wait for the signal to go green in conjunction with the walk movements. So we'll constantly use this data to kind of craft the next few years of small-scale safety improvements as well as larger-scale capital projects.
Again, thank you, staff, for that report. Lot of information here. We can obviously talk about it all evening, I'm sure. One question I had about this in terms of this information getting disseminated to the public, what efforts could be taken on the city on behalf of education? And I just thought about things like, the idea of the time of day and letting people know, of course, driving, hey, time of day, did you know that from 3 to 4, we have as high of a rate of accidents as we do from 5 to 6? Or the month, the fact that October has a higher rate of accidents than December. Would education and any sort of effect be something that's going to help us maybe bring these numbers down?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely more we could be doing on like getting this information out there on especially on our website. This report wasn't even really easily available. It is the 2016-2020 report is actually on our website now, but even that is maybe not as like advertised as it could be. But yeah, I think that's like definitely a good suggestion to like try to increase some of the findings from this report and get that out to the public. And one thing I actually did not mention, both actually a pretty big determination in the high crash intersection list was so when we have our database, we exclusively get that information from Longmont PD. But there are areas in the city where Longmont PD does not necessarily do all like post-accident like reporting. So what I did this time was I actually dug through like the CDOT spreadsheets and found that's why Highway 66 and Pace is now on the high crash list, because it really should have been probably for a while, but it was being very undercounted because Colorado State Patrol usually handles a lot. 66 is probably like the weakest point, where especially out east where you can get a lot of Colorado State Patrol reporting that doesn't necessarily come through us directly. And even then it's a little flawed because you're kind of relying on the state's like master spreadsheet that doesn't get updated very often. So that was only current through like 2020. So like they don't have the 2021 edition up yet, but I wanted to throw that in, so.
Hey, thanks again for all this information. It's a lot of data to churn through. I'm wondering, do you feel that you have enough data here, or the type of data is adequate to begin working on Vision Zero? I mean, does it give you enough information to make progress in that regard?
I think it sends us on a track. I mean, it's, like you said, the data's out there. There's a lot of data, as you can tell. Caroline did an amazing job of putting this all together in a fairly tight time frame too, because we had some issues with how the data was developed and provided to us. So there's been a lot of screening of this data to make sure it makes sense for what we're trying to do. But for Vision Zero, this is a good starting point. And I think what we do is we take this, and exactly what was said on the board is assimilate it into something that's more digestible maybe by the public, and something that we can use to educate the public, the different elements of, I'm guessing October, November, December are higher crash rates because people are just starting to figure out, oh yeah, I now have to figure out how to drive on snow again, or rain, or, and it's getting into those factors of people adapting, and then you see in January, February, March, people have figured it out by then. But there might be a bunch of different factors to that. It's just a matter of getting that word out and trying to figure out how we get that information out to the public.
Well, let me just say, Caroline, you did a great job. I found it was very readable for as much data as there was, and easy to understand what you were presenting. So, and thank you for walking us through that. It was very helpful.
Yes, I also appreciate the information you've provided. And I spent some time looking at the fatal crash data in the report. And specifically, I compared the information on Figure 1.0 with the data on Table 6.2 and the crash reports in Section 8. And I found what appeared to be discrepancies in the number of fatalities. And I wonder if I'm not understanding something, or if there could be some discrepancies in the report. And for the years 2017, 2018, and 2020, the numbers of what I assumed were fatalities, and now I think I understand were crashes with fatalities, don't seem to match from figure to table to a text description of the events. So for example, 2017, figure 1.0 says that there were 8 crashes with fatalities. Is that correct?
I think I know the answer to this, but yes.
And table 6.2 reports it as 6.
So I think what I did, so if you look at the back,
And let me go on, just one more thing.
okay.
And when I went and looked at all the reports in section 8, I came up with 11 fatalities. And I know that one of those had 2 dead people, so you would think of that as 10 fatal crashes. But there's still a big difference, 6, 8, 10. Which is the correct number of fatal crashes in 2017? And I ask that because my concern is that if the fatality numbers in table 6.0 are inaccurate, then the crash rate comparisons in table 6.1 and table 6.2 are also inaccurate.
So in section 8, if it's highlighted in red,
Yeah,
that was from Colorado State Patrol.
okay. And you
So
know that
that's-
they reported a fatality, except there's one
Yeah,
place where.
so that
there's
in,
Go ahead.
so in, so that is like, so it's 6 in the table. This is where,
Are you
confusing.
saying that if Longmont PD didn't investigate and file the report, it doesn't count as a fatal crash?
it might not have been, it might have been a mistake that it wasn't added in to one of the tables, but it's certainly, because it's not in our quite frankly, it's not in our database, so you have to remember that, like, extra on top, but I was trying to be as honest as possible, include everything I could find, so.
Any other response?
I think the data you're seeing from, I want to try to answer for Caroline, you can tell me if I'm wrong. The chart that was section 1, figure 1.0, I think what we've done is that was what we had recorded in past years. So in the spreadsheet at the back, that was data we recently added this year. Okay, so we probably didn't update the old data from the chart. We probably just carried the chart over from previous years. So we would have to update that when we added in this year, when we added in those accidents in red. We had never done that before previously. Did that explain, is that
Yeah,
kinda what
that's
we did,
probably,
Caroline? This was the first year we included data from outside of the Longmont PD. That's what the discrepancy is. So we'd have to go back and update the charts for the last 5 years.
All right, well, would you be willing to consider the report that we have tonight as a draft? And you have staff take another look at it and run it through your
Certainly, we
quality
can-
assurance protocols? and
Certainly,
make
we can update that data.
Okay, great. Another question. I see that much of the information in section 7, as you've explained, Ms. Michael, is categorized by average daily traffic volumes. Would it be possible to evaluate crash data, and I guess this would mostly apply to stretches of road in between intersections, by average traffic speed rather than average daily traffic volumes? It seems that that might be useful information as Longmont proceeds with Vision Zero. Do you have the data
So
about
for,
what average speeds are and?
so for the average speed just on, say, like Main Street, 3rd to 4th Avenue, yeah, we do have some counts like that, yes, that do give us an average speed. Or were you asking about the average, like, speeds like on the report? Or just like the, okay.
What I'm trying to get at is, can we use the data to come up with some relationships between traffic speed and the types of crashes that involve bodily injury and death? And maybe use that as input to the Vision Zero process? Because I'm not sure that average daily traffic volumes really helps you much with Vision Zero. As you said, Phil, I mean, if the traffic volumes result in congestion, then you'd have fewer crashes just because the roadway is congested and no one can travel at a high speed. So I'm trying to find out the relationship between average vehicle speed and crashes.
So for this report, the answer would be, we really don't have enough of that data. But I think as we get into a Vision Zero program, there will be a component of that where you collect a lot more data. And the PD is currently looking at, they just picked up some equipment within the last few weeks that we funded through the street fund for them to start collecting speed data throughout the city. They got several portable machines where they're going to put them up so they can identify where people are speeding. They're going to share that data with us, and then we can start building a database of where people are speeding and start collecting those speeds at various times of day. But as part of Vision Zero, you will see more of that data collection, and we can certainly add that into future reports as we collect it, but that would be a factor. Speed is usually something they always look at in police reports, although we don't record it here, because it's usually, for the ADT, it is an estimated number, but certainly, I think speed will be a big factor in a lot of accidents, and it will be a component of Vision Zero, in that lowering speeds is one of their primary directives in the Vision Zero kind of overall program. So as we move into that, there will be a component of collecting that data, yes.
Thanks, Jim. As I travel around Longmont, sometimes I see these, what look like little white trailers at the side of the road with a digital display. And the display that I see as a motorist is, what my speed is and whether I should slow down or not. But are those pieces of equipment also recording the speeds of all the vehicles that pass by?
That equipment is not.
It's not.
Those
So
are speed trailers.
It would only
just-
be this new
It's
equipment.
the newer equipment that they're actually portable. They're just like if you look up on Kimbark, those radar signs we have that show the speed limit, they're very similar to that. They're portable. And they're a newer model that records the speed of data. It'll do traffic counts as well. Then they're uploaded to the cloud, and then we'll have that data every time they install one or put one out and leave them out there. They're looking at what PD has found is they get reports from various residents of people speeding on this road. But for them to make the best use of their personnel, they want to know when those people are speeding so that they can use their personnel more effectively. If they know that it's done at certain times of day, they'll be able to do that. In the meantime, we'll record that speed and then the counts and data, so we'll have more accurate information. So if it's successful, we'll buy a few more next year.
Yeah, that
So we'll see
seems
as
to
they-
me like it would be very useful.
Yeah, they just picked them up this
information to
year,
have.
so we had some funds at the end of the budget year, so we helped them buy them, so we'll see what it looks like, and then there's a number of tools out there. I think we're picking up some new counter systems as opposed to the tubes you put down on the road. We're going with a more of using radar. And when we do traffic counts, traditionally you had like these rubber tubes that go across the road that count cars. There's radar systems out there we're going to start using that are less expensive and safer for our traffic tech to put out. We've got, for doing pedestrian counts, we've got actually portable video cameras we put on a pole. And then they record data, and then we fast forward it while we count pedestrians at intersections. So there's a lot of technology out there, and as we move into kind of Vision Zero and better data collection, you'll see we'll probably have to increase our traffic staff. And those are proposals that'll be defined as we get into the action plan through the course of next year.
Great, thanks. My next question is really for any and all of you to respond to, and I will be asking you to speculate. So in your professional opinion, what effect on fatal and serious injury crashes would an across-the-board 5-mile-per-hour speed limit reduction in Longmont have? And how about a 10-mile-per-hour reduction?
Well, it's interesting. If you just changing a speed limit with doing no other roadway, like no other roadway changes, like just changing the sign, I don't know how effective that would be, because people tend to sort of drive what they feel is right for a particular, roadway section. So I don't know, that would maybe just be like an artificial, like, you post it lower, but you don't change anything else. So are people going to like actually behave any differently? Probably, maybe not long-term without like some enforcement. Also with, so in all these crash reports too, they have usually a driver's estimated speed listed on them. But if you try to go by, it gets complicated. I've tried to look at like the speed differential between them, or like the highest speed, because sometimes you're really looking at the speed of the vehicle that's not at fault, because if someone's turning left and is turning left like at fault, then they're not turning left at like 80 miles an hour. So you're really looking at the second vehicle that's maybe going the speed limit, that's 45. So just some insight into that, if you.
Ben Ortiz, Transportation Planner. I think the short answer is probably not much. I had a conversation with one of City of Boulder's transportation planners, and we had the opportunity to discuss their Vision Zero program, where they lowered the speed limit to 20 miles per hour on their local streets. And what he indicated to me was that they actually didn't really see any reduction in speeds, and that while the lowered speed limit is enforceable, the police department isn't actually enforcing the lower speed limit. And so what he's indicated to me is that it really hasn't resulted in a behavior change. What it has done is it has stimulated a conversation on speeding and the need to bring down speeds by other means other than lowering the speed limit. But I had Caroline's job when I was here many years ago. It was my first job here. And the traffic engineer at that time was very reluctant to lower speed limits just to try to bring down speeds, because he was fairly convinced that it wouldn't work. And the evidence is fairly compelling that that's the case.
Yeah, like Ben said, signs are just signs, and you're not wrong. Lowering the speed means people are going over the speed limit. You're correct in that manner. The problem is they're still doing the thing they're not supposed to be doing, and it's the same thing. I have a toddler at home, and he's staring at something like a chair that he wants to climb up of, and I'm like, no. Looks at me and says, I'm gonna try it. So a lot of it, maybe kind of a demeaning analogy, but drivers like that are like toddlers. You got to make them think it was their idea to go that speed limit, to do that certain speed, because if everyone followed every law we had, wasn't distracted, we'd hardly have any crashes. The reason why crashes do happen is people are going too fast, they're too aggressive, and they sometimes just don't care. So a lot of it is getting people to do what they want without them realizing that they're doing it. So lowering the speed limit really won't make the roadway safer. It's more combination of putting out non-invasive measures, more psychological measures like road diets, signs, maybe more enforcement, or even just figuring out who and why they're speeding. Because a lot of things you'll see, it's the same person. So is it a widespread issue, or is it one person driving down the road that everyone sees who thinks it's just a repeating issue? So in my opinion, no, changing the speed limit doesn't really change the speed limit. It's changing driver behavior. It's going to change the speed limit. So.
Okay, I'll jump in. So going back to your question, to lower the speed limit 20 miles per hour universally throughout the city, I don't think, as Ben indicated, in our residential streets, that's not where you're seeing the major accidents and fatalities. It's on our arterials and collectors. So I would think lowering the speed limit with, as Kyle indicated, with some other improvements will work to change behavior and could make a difference. There are some areas, an example at night, that's 45 miles per hour. I think if you lowered the speed limit 5 to 10 miles per hour in that roadway, might improve it. So I think it's something that as part of Vision Zero, we would have to look at on our major arterials. The example, one of the examples of lower speed limits doesn't always help with fatalities. Is one of the fatalities was on Main Street where it was in a 25 mile per hour speed limit. So it isn't always speed that's the problem. It's the behavior of a driver who was a DUI. So I think universally lowering the speed limit will not be effective overall throughout the city, but I think in case-by-case basis, we have to look at that, and that's where we'll see success.
Did you say that a drunk driver traveling 25 miles per hour?
No, he's in a
caused
25 mile per
fatality?
hour zone. So whether, it doesn't matter what the speed limit, what you set the speed limit at.
Okay.
Okay.
That's just an example of. the
That's just one
20.
example.
Got it. All right, thank you to all of you. That's it for my comments and questions on the crash report.
I got one more. Well, I think to reiterate is, I agree, Vision Zero is all about speed control and separation. So once speeds go higher, then you separate your pedestrians and your bikes off the main road. And when I'm looking at the map of the, bikes and peds, do we have any data of what was peds versus bikes in terms of crashes? I'm looking at the, principal arterial roads, bikes and peds.
Yeah, so like, are you asking whether you can break that down into
Yeah.
just bikes? Yeah, you can.
Okay.
And I have it, it's just not presented that way. I did like write this down because I realized it wasn't on there. But for 2021, I saw like 36 separate bicycle crashes and then 31 separate pedestrian crashes.
And then do we keep data of how those happen potentially? So was the
Yes.
ped trying to cross the road and
Yes, we do.
maybe, yeah, okay.
Yeah, and actually a lot of what I've seen, especially with bikes, is bikes act like pedestrians because they're like on the sidewalk. And some of these are like conflicts because bikes obviously go faster than a pedestrian. So even if someone might think they're clear, like pulling out of the driveway, they maybe don't see the bike that's coming a lot faster, like downhill. So Yeah, like bikes mostly, like, a lot of them are like crossing in like the pedestrian crosswalks. I would
Okay.
say most of these are due more so to that than like bikes acting like cars and like using a bike, continuous like bike lane on the roadway.
Okay.
It's definitely like a pattern I'm seeing, but
And then, is there a trend of bikes if a crash is on the roadway? Because at least according to CDC, it's 64% of death is on the road, and 27 is at an intersection for a bicyclist. So, and that's where I want to tie into that vision zero
Yeah.
of separation, would be key. Now, we don't have many deaths, luckily, but yeah, just an idea.
no, yeah, we have, that can be broken down.
Okay.
Yeah, I have more like detail than necessarily what's on there. But sometimes it's like trying to present it in a way that makes sense. But yeah, there's a lot of, I have it broken down by like signalized intersections, unsignalized, and then like the mid blocks.
Okay.
So that's something I can develop or
Okay.
present if anyone's interested in it. But
I'm curious.
okay.
That's all.
I think we can move on. However, I think I want to reiterate what Board Member McInerney asked for, that we treat this as a draft. And some of the changes that are made, we just get a chance to take a look at that. And maybe the ped bike separation data would be good to also have as part of the I won't call it correction, the addition or the change.
Yes, we want to thank the board very much for all your input, because this does help us kind of craft the draft, as it were. So we'll work on that. Thank you. The next item we had for you, if you're ready and willing and able to go on, is the action item of the Transportation Advisory Board Annual Report. We've also attached to that the proposed work program for 2023. That's just for your information at this point. We'll actually want you to take a look at that, and we'll talk about that in your January meeting, and try to finalize that draft proposed work plan then. But at this point in time, we do need you to review the different items that we've done in 2022. We did include the crash report data, knowing that that was coming, so we did want to put that on there. This is something we do typically every December or January, but we thought we'd have some time today to do this quickly, and it's pretty straightforward. It is the idea that in 2022, we held those 9 regular meetings, including the one today. The first 4 meetings of the year were conducted in a virtual format. That was because of COVID, basically, we knew that. And 5 meetings, luckily, we were able to start meeting in person. That was wonderful when we could finally get together, and here we are today. So you'll see the activities listed here. We did Resilient St. Vrain project update, the Sugar Factory and STEAM update, transportation issues in the state legislature. So we brought those to you. We'll bring those to you again. A lot of this will come back again next year, but that's one for sure that will come back. That's just an annual one. The update on transportation improvement project proposals this year was quite full of that, with 4 different calls for projects. So hopefully next year you won't see much more of that, but we will keep you updated on what's going on with our projects through the CIP. We updated the TAB bylaws with language on virtual meetings and notifications. That won't come before you again, so that's pretty much done there. Subcommittee to interview new TAB applicants. That's going to be an annual thing that happens every, I think, we'll probably say May, is we'll have to do that every May. Boulder County report and update on projects associated with the 119 BRT project. That's going to be something that's probably going to go on for the next 2 years, at least next year. So you'll get more information about that. Boulder County update on mobility and access for all ages. That's a plan that was adopted this year, so that should be done. Boulder County update on 287 BRT. That's something that's going to be ongoing as well, so you'll hear more about that coming up. We always do the capital improvement program, so you'll see that next year. We always like to, that's a good one that you guys, there's lots of interaction to talk about how our projects are doing, and then hopefully you'll be able to come back and reference this crash report when we talk about that, how the projects are interrelated to the things we're trying to do for safety. Review and comment on Public Works, Natural Resources, operational budget. I think next year it'll be just Public Works, correct?
Yes.
We've Natural Resources in a different group, starting in a couple weeks on January 1st. Work plan and annual report, that's what we're doing today and next month. Annual board elections of new chair and vice chair, we were, unfortunately had to do that today because we've lost a member who, and we appreciate board member Chris stepping up to fill that role, so thank you very much. RTD update, that's another fun one that we do every year. We'll invite them back, usually March and April time period for that one. The proposed CIP is really where you guys get to say a lot of kind of what, you look at our projects and see what's coming from our Public Works group and how you can have some input into what projects move forward. 287 bus rapid transit, that's kind of a carryover from what we just talked about, so need to remove that one. As we just had 2 different presentations last year on that, or this year on that. And so one was more of the first round, and this was more of the phase 2 piece that we talked about. So that just lets you know that you guys did a lot of work with that this year. And then, of course, the Vision Zero presentation, that was fairly recent. The Flex Bus update, that was last month as well. And then tonight's high crash location summary. So in draft form, we'll work on that to get more information on that as well. But you probably won't see that again, but we'll update it and put it out there and make sure you guys have links to it on the web when it comes available. So with that, we're requesting that the board review, discuss, and approve the 2022 annual report so we can send it up to your city council and make sure they know all the work you've done this year. Thank you very much.
Do we want to have any comments on this, or should we move to a vote on moving this forward? Do we need to do that?
Just because this is what, meeting 4 for me? Question on, because obviously we have a council member here most often. How does anything that we say also goes to planning and zoning? Just curiosity.
Yeah, in the bylaws, this board is really meant to report directly to city council. You can certainly make that recommendation. We can take it up, but it's something not typically done.
All right. Well,
Unless the Planning and Zoning Commission asks for TAB to look at something specific that
Okay.
they can't answer.
all right. It says recommendations to city council as well as to the planning and zoning commission, so I was just curious.
Yeah, I haven't seen that too often. What we sometimes have done in the past, and this doesn't happen as much anymore, is we used to have annexations come through to TAB all the time. But it just got to the point of the TAB considered it more of minutia and, access points onto roads, and it was very general. And so it was either too little or we had too much that we brought to this board that couldn't be resolved at the board level. So there was a few times where we had annexations where, like a Walmart, where we had all the information, all the parking and everything, and we spent 2 hours easily on that. So that's the kind of issues that we got into with the annexations. And there really haven't been any annexations that were very transportation specific that we've seen yet. So those were the ones we'd bring to you typically. And if those come back through, we will certainly bring them to you as the transportation issues come up. And then you would make the recommendation to PZ first on those and then up to council.
Okay. Thank you.
If there are no further comments, I move that we approve the 2022 Transportation Advisory Board Annual Report.
I second. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you very much for your time on that. We appreciate it. We'll move that on to council.
Okay, I'll start on this side with board comments on tonight. Anything else that we want to be brought up? My mistake. Next action item is the 2023 proposed tab work plan and schedule.
We just attached that as part of the last agenda item. So what we'd like to do is, that's our draft
Right.
work plan for 2023. In January, we'd love to we will come back to you
Yeah.
regardless, and we'll talk about any changes that you might have to that you might want to see in that work plan. But this is just to get it in front of you a month prior, so it gives you plenty of time to hopefully get through those different items and make sure we're covering everything that you want to talk about in 2023.
Okay, then I'll then start again with the comments from the board, starting at the end.
I don't know, it was a very interesting conversation tonight. So, again, thank you for the very in-depth, lot of data presentation. I do think the crash report will, eventually with Vision Zero, we'll get even more data, and then hopefully we can really focus on the physics of roads. And like we said, signs don't really help. So, I'm looking forward to continuing that discussion. So, thank you.
I'd like to reiterate, thank you for the crash report. A lot of work went into it, and that is clear. Yeah, just thank you. If this is going to be a draft report, then there are some editing or proofing issues with it that I'm happy to discuss after the meeting if you want. But that's it. Thank you very much.
I also appreciate the opportunity to have had a discussion about the crash report, and I look forward to coordinating crash information with Vision Zero planning in the future. Regarding the 2023 work plan and schedule, I'll give you a hint of what I'll be saying in January. The only place I see Vision Zero on that sheet is under Dr. Cog. So I'll be looking for some City of Longmont Vision Zero action items on our schedule for next year. That's it for me.
I want to say to our two newest board members how much I appreciate the input you've had. Really good questions. Board member Wickland and Hinterberg. And to board member Lehner and McInerney, thanks for beginning a rousing discussion with the staff about this crash report. I greatly appreciate the effort that's put into the safety in our town and all the great work that you do for the city of Longmont. And thank you all. I agree with Board Member McInerney. I think we need to maybe discuss before January 9th as a board, even via email, how we can better assist with Vision Zero. So just an idea. All right, thanks again.
And again, excuse me, to reiterate the rest of the comments, thank you. I know this was a comprehensive report. A lot of effort was put into this, so we really do appreciate that. In regards to that, I guess my only comment is, and somebody much smarter than me said this, and you might know this gentleman, Larry Haas, CDOT, always used to joke that, traffic engineering is a rational study of irrational behavior. And so, in many cases, lowering a speed limit isn't necessarily going to regulate irrational behavior. So I know the work that you do is very important, and I agree with the comments regarding Vision Zero. I think that's something that we're invested in as a board that we definitely want to be involved with for 2023. And I'll stop here and let Councilmember Yarborough offer any comments that she has.
Thank you. Just want to say ditto, what everyone else had. It's so much work, so much great work. Thank you for all this information is needed. And I just love representing the city of Longmont when I go to these conferences. I've only been to 2, but it's amazing how much work you all have already done for our city and even the board, and to say how progressive we are. And to see other cities that's even larger than us really don't have a plan or put anything in place. So I'm definitely honored and grateful to be representing the city of Longmont and you all. So, and thank you for the city, the staff for all the things that you do and all the hard work and the data you put together for us. And I thank the board for making sure that the details are transparent. So, thank you.
Great. Can I get a motion to adjourn our meeting?
Sure, I will move to adjourn.
Do you have a second?
Seconded.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.